Okay, welcome back, everybody. Today, I think it's share number 3 on Sefer Vayikra. Rabbi Jay has a family simcha today, so he can't be with us. But hopefully, things should work okay today. I'm a host, and Asher is co-host. Okay, so today we're going to get through probably the one of the most difficult parts of Sefer Vayikra. I decided to dedicate a share to Korban Chatat. I want to begin with a quick review and talk about a quick review of my key point. And I didn't share my screen, did I? I'll share my screen. There we go. Okay, so today's quick share number 3, from sanctuary, Sinai to sanctuary to society, and the Korban Chatat, atonement or cleansing. And as Asher asked me beforehand, what does atonement mean? And I said, I have no idea. But I just said atonement because everyone calls like Yom Kippur the Day of Atonement when we bring the Chatat. Usually it's understood as asking for forgiveness or something like that. But that's why I use the word cleansing. Now, there's no doubt the word chatat is used when someone sins. That's clear. And there's no doubt the word chatat is also used for cleansing sometimes, like chitui. The question, are they related? Are they just by chance similar meanings? And how they relate to one another? We'll suggest something as we go on. But first, I want to focus in on what we're doing. The key point I tried to make in the first couple shiurim was that someone visiting the Mishkan, the purpose of the visit is not a consumer coming to ask for something or to ask forgiveness. It's an employee coming before his boss or before his employer. And again, we're working for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That was the covenant we made in Har Sinai. And the famous Ramban, which explains beautifully, and all the psukim support it, that there's so many parallels between Mount Sinai and the Mishkan, and therefore we never leave Har Sinai, we take it with us. And a Jew, the Jewish people, have a constant reminder of Mount Sinai in their midst. And when there was a Mishkan, it was a Mishkan that moved from place to place with them. When they settled down in the land of Israel and conquered the land, hopefully that would have been the temple. When they misbehaved, God took the temple away. And the rabbis replaced the temple with the Beit Knesset, or the shul. And therefore, anything we learn about the Mishkan or the Mikdash, the same principles, hopefully we can apply to the synagogue. And therefore, when we go to pray to God, and remember tefillot, or what's called keneged, or relate to korbanot. We'll talk about later the connection between them. But therefore, our visit to a Beit Knesset should not be like a consumer coming to buy something, but rather like an employee meeting his boss, reminding what his job is, wanting to maybe do a better job, discuss how he can do a better job, remember what his life is about, etc. And therefore, anything we learn about the Mikdash can help us understand how we daven. Now, in Sefer Vayikra, we began, the first 3 chapters were 1 unit, which we talked about, and it was a voluntary offering. And the main point we made in the voluntary offerings was basically Korban Olah and a Shlamim. And Olah, the entire Korban goes to God. The Shlamim is shared with all the different people. The Kohen gets something, the altar gets something, the owner gets something, but he has to share. But either way, those were the same sacrifices that were brought at Har Sinai when we made the covenant. And therefore, by bringing an Olah and Shlamim, when someone wants to come and visit, that's going to help remind them of the Sinai experience and that obligation. The next unit, chapters 4 to 5, that's our topic today. Those are mandatory offerings called Korban Chovah. And this whole unit, 1 through 5, are going to be called Korban Yechid. These are sacrifices that the individual brings, in contrast to Korban Tzibor, the national Korban, which we'll find later in Vayikra and also in Sefer Bamidbar. Now, there are several Korbanot Yechid. There are certain sacrifices for the individual that aren't here, but this is the main presentation of them. And chapter 6 and 7 is going to be how to bring the Korbanot. We might talk about that a little bit today if we get that far. Then we have the story of the dedication of the Mishkan, which I'm sure we'll relate to today, but we'll discuss that next time. Then we're going to have a whole section later on, after when someone comes to the temple, what he should bring, what he can bring, what he needs to bring, etc. But sometimes someone can come to the temple, temporarily because something happened, something in life cycle event, something happened that made him not ready yet to come to the temple. We call that Tumah. And then we have 5 some chapters about who can't come to the temple and how you contract what's called Tumah and how to rid yourself of it, called Tahara. Then we have entering on Yom Kippur, the Holy of Holies. We'll spend some time on that. And then another set of laws that relate to it. Then we get to the second half of the book that talks about Kedusha and the realm of people, Kedoshim Tiyu, and we'll expound upon that, and the Kedusha of the Kohanim, then Kedusha in the realm of time, the holidays, the Moadim, and Kedusha in the time of space, the holiness of the land of Israel, and then the blessings and curses at the end, and we'll call this an epilogue, the laws of Erchin, when someone gives a value of himself to God. Again, that was way too fast, but that's our overview of Sefer Vayikra that we want to cover. Today we're going to finish up the first section and talk about these mandatory offerings and see what we can learn from them. Okay, so that was my little introduction and review what we did last week. In chapters 1 through 7, we talked about what they call menu-driven. Someone coming to the temple can either be an employee, which will take us to chapters 6 and 7, Parshat Tzav. We'll deal with that next week, hopefully. And our topic last week and this week, if you're a visitor coming, again, now I'm using the word employee in two different ways. When you're visiting as an employer, you're visiting as an employee on behalf of God, remembering your job. When you're a Kohen, when you're an employee of the temple, then you're helping the other employees coming to work with God. You're helping them offer their korban. Why a person can't bring his own sacrifice, why someone has to do it for him, hopefully we'll discuss that as well when we get to Parshat Tzav. We'll discuss the word Torah. Now, we discussed what made last week we talked about what made the first 3 chapters one unit. It's one dibur, one header. They're all voluntary. They all have the phrase reach nichach in them. They're all presented with the same structure. And of course, it was the opening section of the book because the whole point is not that God Shekhinah is back and we have a Mishkan in our midst. Every individual can visit if he's prepared. Okay. Today's share is going to be in chapters 4 through 5, and we'll talk about what's going to make them a distinct unit. Unlike the first 3 chapters, which are all one dibur, chapters 4 through 5 will be distinct because they're all obligatory korbanot, but there are multiple diburs. Instead of all in one dibur, multiple, we have to try to understand why. And the presentation is different because in the first 3 chapters, first, what do you want to bring? You want to bring an olah, a mincha, or a shlamim, and then it says what are your choices in each category. You want to bring a cow, you want to bring sheep, you want to bring a bird, or if you're bringing flour, how you present it, etc. But that's the sort of menu-driven in that sense. Chapters 4 and 5, it begins on first. It says what you did wrong, what was the case that you did wrong. Then it relates to your personal status. We'll see if you're a politician, if you're the Kohen Gadol, if you're a regular person, and then it tells you what animal you bring. But there's a lot of phrases throughout the entire section of chapters 4 and 5 that are in each section. Not only they're obligatory, but we have the word kapara mentioned in each one of them. We'll take a look at that. For some reason, the first one's missing it. And they all have smicha, where the person leans on the korban. What's the meaning of shchita? And what's interesting, it always says, well, I want to point that out. When you do the shchita, when you shech the animal, it always says you shecht it in the same place where the olah shechted. And when you put the chelev on the altar, it's on the same place like the shlamim. Again, what I'm going to show you is that even though this is a chatat, in the presentation of the chatat, we're echoing the olah and shlamim for some reason. I'll try to give a reason for that. And then in all these cases, we sprinkle the blood on the altar, sometimes in different places, but the leftover blood is poured onto what's called the yesod mizbeach, the base of the mizbeach, the bottom area, which isn't the entire mizbeach, just 2 walls and a little extra more are called the yesod. There's like an extra step over there you can pour the blood on. Now, what we do now is try to understand what's happening in chapters 4 and 5, what ties them all together, what makes each parsha unique. I'll just repeat that. We're going to go through case by case. Might be a little boring, but sooner or later we have to go through the chatat. I want to show again what ties them all together and what makes each parsha unique. The chapter division isn't bad, and this is probably way too small, my little flow chart, so I'm going to make it bigger. So I continue this flow chart from last week, and now we have the obligatory korbanot, chapters 4 and 5 is over here. Let me make it, oh, that wasn't good. Here we are. Move that over to here. That should do it. Okay, so I'm going to get my little marker and annotate now. Annotate, is that good? Okay. So again, this is the introduction for Korban Chovah, and almost all the cases will have the word kapara. like the chaper alav and v'nislach lo, the idea of slicha, which I guess is forgiving. Now, why there's need for forgiving, if we have time, we'll talk about that as well. But first, I want to go through the cases. Now, in chapter 4, what's going to be common in everything in chapter 4 is the word shogeg, which means unintentional, and the idea of smicha, which we'll talk about. The olev v'yored, well, that's going to be really complicated. We'll spend most of our time on that today. There we have smicha, instead of smicha, we have what's called vidui. But again, we have the same idea of kapara and slicha, but the cases are very interesting. We have to talk about that. But we're missing the concept of shogeg, we'll see. Then we're going to have the korban hasham afterwards in the second half of chapter 5. And then there'll be 3 types of hasham, and each one very interesting cases. And we have to talk about what the difference between a chatat and hasham is, even though they're very similar. Okay, before we get started, let me just check if there's any questions real fast. Stop the share. Any questions so far? I didn't lose everybody yet? Okay, so get ready. Okay, we're going to go through the psukim a little bit and try to...
Sources?
Now, yeah, go ahead.
No, the question is, where are the source for
Oh,
the...
they didn't give the source sheet?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was one that was listed, but it was, I think, from last week.
Okay. Because I sent it on Friday. It should be on the website. But either way, I can share it again in the middle of the share. I'll share it. But the main thing is Tanakh. Yeah, we're going to share it. Tanakh will definitely be on the website afterwards for sure. What are we doing here? I'm going to read now the case, the first case. I just want to follow the how it's being presented. I'm going to share just open of a Chumash, chapter 4. Notice a new dibor. We haven't had a dibor since chapter 1. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe lemor. Daber b'nei Yisrael lemor. Listen to the introduction. Nefesh ki techta bishkaga b'kol mitzvot Hashem asher lo te'asena v'asam yachad me'ela. Pay attention to the word v'asa. In other words, in all the cases in chapter 4, you did something, but you did it bishkaga. Let me stop the share for a second. I want to catch the word. Someone tell me how you translate the word shkaga. What's the opposite of shkaga in Hebrew?
Intentional.
Amazing.
In Hebrew, what do we call that?
Mesid.
Therefore, when you intentionally do something wrong, that's called mesid. And mesid, in these cases, can come if you do these things on purpose. A korban's not going to help. In fact, all the cases that you chayv chatat will see, if you did it on purpose, you would be chayv karet. That's the cloud the rabbis learned from here. Now, how would you what's the opposite of intentional? What would you say? I'm going to hear 2 different answers.
With intent.
No, what's the opposite of mesid is intentional. What would be the opposite of intentional?
Accidental.
Oh, perfect. Okay, that's what I want to hear. Some people say accidental. Some people say unintentional. There's a big difference between unintentional and accidental. In general, unintentional usually means you could have been more careful. I'll give you a bad example. Okay, let's say you're driving to shul and it's late, and you might miss a baruch or something. Okay, and so you're late. So you'll drive a little faster over the speed limit. You might not stop at the stop sign properly, etc. So, and it just so happens you're in such a rush to go to shul. Unfortunately, you hit a pedestrian who's crossing the street. You didn't pay attention. And now, you didn't do that on purpose. That's for sure. But you could have been more careful. Now, there's something different. You're following the rules, and a strong wind comes out of nowhere, and just so happens, or someone runs into the street. But you couldn't have been more careful. That's accidental. The shogeg is usually unintentional, not accidental. Accidental is called honest. That comes up a lot when it gets to arim miklat. I'm not going to get into there, but there's a big difference in arim miklat whether there's shogeg and anus as opposed to mesid. And therefore, but there's a what do you call it? There's a sort of a spectrum of what's considered unintentional, what's intentional, what the intent has to be. But here it seems to be that you could have been more careful, but you did it. But you didn't do it on purpose. Oh, that's clear. Now, when it comes to Arei Miklat, then there's not only doing something intentionally, also premeditated. That's more intentional. In the sense, you intentionally, you saw someone, you got angry. In the middle of anger, you hit somebody, but you weren't planning to kill him. It wasn't plotted. It just happened on the spot, as opposed to like a planned murder, that's super mazid. Now, let's go back to our topic. In chapter 4, the person is doing something. He's doing something wrong that had he been aware of what he was doing, he wouldn't have done it. Like a person is not going to eat chelev. Chelev is that's like not kosher meat. But you forgot. Weren't paying attention. Had you been more careful, had you read the label, whatever it was. Shabbat, you're machalo Shabbat. You didn't do it on purpose, but you were had you been keeping Shabbat properly, you wouldn't have gone in the car and started driving and then realized later on or lit a candle or something like that. So you didn't do it on purpose, but you did something. You did something that was obviously wrong. But had you been aware, you wouldn't have done it, but you could have been more careful. Now it depends on who you are. And then we can have, like, I think 4 or 5 different cases. First one would be the Kohen Gadol. It's called Kohen Mashiach. The Kohen is appointed. Then we're going to have the strange case where the entire nation does something wrong, which sounds like really strange. So the rabbis say it's like the Supreme Court or the Sanhedrin makes a mistake. So they have a collective responsibility, but the nation as a whole is responsible. Then we're going to have the case of a politician called a Nasi. Now, what does a Nasi mean? Is that any elected official? Or is that a Nasi as opposed to a Melech or something? That's a little complicated, but I'll just call them a political leader. And then you have a regular person with no special status. So let's take a look and see the key phrases that repeat themselves, okay? I'm going to open up my Chumash now and pay attention to a person sins bishkaga. This is the header for the whole unit. For all the mitzvot of God, all what's called a mitzvah lo taseh, don't do something, and he does it even though he wasn't supposed to do it. Then he says im kohen mashiach yechta, which is really strange. If he sins, lo shmata am. No, it seems his sin seems different because when the Kohen Gadol sins, the entire nation is sinning in some ways, or for the guilt of the people. I'll talk about when we get to the word Hashem. We'll go back to this maybe. And he brings his chatat. He brings a par. He brings a cow. Ben bakar tamim lashem chatat. Okay. Now, what do you do with a chatat? In a nutshell, a chatat, the altar gets the same thing as a shlamim, meaning the altar gets the blood. You sprinkle the blood, and the chelev, the fat that covers the abdominal cavity, that goes on the altar. If it was a shlamim, the owners would eat it outside, outside the asara, but within the walls of Yerushalayim. If it's a chatat, it's called kodesh kodashim. It can only be eaten by the kohen. Kohanim only can eat it, and within the asara, within the confines of the temple, not in the city of Jerusalem, but within the confines of the temple, what's called the asara. And therefore, he brings the par to the entrance to the Ohel Moed in front of God, and he does what's called smicha. All these cases in chapter 4 all have smicha. Now, what does smicha mean? Chazal understands smicha means putting it like we do on Yom Kippur, because it says on Yom Kippur, v'samach yodo, okay, v'tvada alav. So on the Yom Kippur Avodah in chapter 16, we have smicha and vidui on the same pasuk, and Chazal learned from there. Every time it says smicha, we do vidui. But pay attention here; it just says it does smicha, okay, and we shech the par. The Kohen takes from the blood, brings it indoors, right? And then he sprinkles the blood inside. And now this is what's called a chatat pnimit. You've heard the wording before. Most chataot, most sin offerings, almost all offerings, the blood is sprinkled on the outdoor mizbeach. Special korbanot, the blood is sprinkled on the indoor mizbeach, like on Yom Kippur. The par and ser Yom Kippur go indoors. So here, when the Kohen sins, this is like a national sin, and therefore the blood is brought in almost like on Yom Kippur goes into the Ohel Moed, not into the Kodesh Kodashim, but into the Ohel Moed. Okay, and then he sprinkles the blood 7 times in front of the parochet, and then he puts the blood on the altars, on the 4 corners of the Mizbach HaKtoret in front of God, and the leftover blood he pours on the base of the Mizbech. Now, it's almost like Yom Kippur without going into the Kodesh Kodashim. It's just what he does on the parochet and on the Mizbach HaKtoret, like the second half of the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol with the Dam, but otherwise it's very similar to the Yom Kippur Korban. Of course, because he doesn't go to the Kodesh Kodashim, he can wear his Bigdei Sahav. He doesn't have to put on Bigdei Lavan. Now, the Chelev, listen carefully. I'm sorry. What does he say here? The Chelev of the Chatat, he takes off, okay, and he puts it, and the two kidneys, all the fat that covers the abdominal cavity, that he takes, and he just like you take, it says all the time, just like you take from the Zabach Shlamim, and you put it on the Mizbach HaOlah. So the Mizbach HaOlah gets the emurim, just like a shlamim gets, okay? But because this korban is not eaten, what's called a chatat pnimit, whenever it's chatat pnimit, the kohen doesn't get to eat the korban. The meat goes sort of, it can't be eaten, and therefore we burn it outside the camp. It's called chatat hanisrafet. The chatat pnimit, when the blood is sprinkled in the Olam Moed, then the animal is burnt outside the temple in what's called Beit HaDeshen, in the burning place, which is outside the temple. Okay, so he takes the part outside the machane, outside the camp, to a clean place, just like he does on Yom Kippur, and there he burns it, the leftover meat there. That's the first case. What's the next case? Im kol adat Yisrael yishgu. If the shogeg now, if the intention was the entire nation, and people didn't know, and they did one of these things which shouldn't be done, basically Sanhedrin made a mistake, and they all did something wrong. The classic case is they said tuna fish was kosher, but it wasn't kosher, something like that. That was of course, tuna is not a, you're not chayv karev for that. But I'm saying, let's say they say a certain animal was kosher, really it wasn't kosher, something like that. And then they realize they made a mistake. Then on behalf of the whole nation, the Sanhedrin has to bring a korban chatat. Now, and we do the same thing, we do smicha. And Chazal understand three members of the Sanhedrin have to do smicha from the elders on the par, and we do the same thing like we did to the previous par. You sprinkle the blood indoors 7 times on the prochet, 4 times on the corners of the mizbeach, and then the rest of the blood you put on the base of the mizbeach, on the outdoor one, and the chelev goes on again on the regular mizbeach, just like he did to the par beforehand. Okay, and then what's the final phrase again? V'chiper lehem v'nislach lehem. The phrase comes up every time at the end. And because this is an indoor chatat, we take the part and burn it outside. Now, if a politician, or called a nasi, maybe I shouldn't say politician, if the nasi sins, remember, Sefer Vayikra never mentions the king, the kohen. So remember, we have nasim, every tribe has a nasi. Most likely it's the political leader of the shevet, at least, would be considered the nasi, and does one of these things, again, bishkaga, but again, and he's guilty, or he found out afterwards what he did was wrong. He brings, instead of a cow, he brings a seir. A seir zachar tamim. Instead of a cow, he brings the kohanim always bring a par, and the nasi brings a seir chatat, which sort of reminds us of what happens on the holidays when the korban tzibur, when the tzibur brings a chatat, it's always a serizim. Reminds us of the Yosef story. Now, we'll try to give reasons for all these specific animals as we go on. Again, we have the same thing, smicha, on the thing, shechting it, it's a chatat. Now, this time the blood doesn't go indoors. This goes on the karnot mizbach ha'olah. I told you the blood always on mizbach ha'olah, and the leftover blood you pour on the base of the mizbech, and the chelev, the fat, is on the mizbech hachitzon, just like the zevach shlamim, and the same phrase at the end, v'chiper lav ha'kohen michato v'nislach lo. Now, if a regular person sins, if nefesh techta, he has a choice. He can either bring a seira. You can either bring, it's the same thing as the nasi pretty much, but it's a different animal. It's a female goat or a female sheep, a female lamb, either a goat or a lamb. But it's a female. It's a sira or a kipsa, but otherwise it's all the same things. You do smicha on the animal, you shecht it, b'makom ha'olah, you shecht it and you spill the blood on the mizbach ha'olah. And you take the emurim, the chelev, you take off just like you did from the shlamim. Remember, every single time it talks about just like the olah and the shlamim, but this is now a chatat. And what's interesting now, we have the phrase reach nichoch now for the first time, and the chiper lav hakohen v'nislach lo, the phrase we have all the times. Now, and then the possibility, if you don't want to bring a sira, if you don't bring a she-goat, you can bring a kipsa, a female lamb. You bring a nekeva from kvasim, but otherwise the same. You do the same thing with the animal. The only thing is you take otherwise it's the same phrase at the end. That's chapter 4. Hope that was clear. Now gets the complicated part. We get to chapter 5. We're still the same dibor. Now wait, let me take a break for a second. Who remembers on Yom Kippur when you do vidui? We did all the viduis by the alphabet. And then at the end, at the very end, we say, Al chatem shanu chayvim olah, Al chatem shanu chayvim chatat. Remember saying that? Now, then we say, Al chatem shanu chayvim lem olev yored. Anyone remember something saying that? Then we say Hashem Tolu, Hashem Vada, and things like that. Now, the Siddur is assuming, or the Matzah is assuming, you know your Sefer Vayikra. But probably the Olev Yored is probably the most meaningful one that we say. It's most likely, if there's a Korban we're obligated to bring, it's called the Olev Yored. Now, the word Olev means up and Yored means down. But can anyone explain to me what that means when you say Olev Yored? But you've heard the saying, right?
What you can afford.
Yeah. So Olev Yored means you have to bring a Korban, a sacrifice, but the animal you bring is a function of your income. Notice, if you're gainfully employed, it's the same thing as a chatat, the same animal. If you're middle class or lower middle class, you can bring a bird. You can bring what's called a yonah, a pigeon or a bird, whatever it's called in English. And if you're really, really poor, on welfare, you can bring flour. Got that? Now, what's Olev Yored? The value of the korban goes up and down. So it's the same cases, but the animal you bring or the offering you bring for the chatat is a function of your income. Now, who decides what your income is? You decide yourself. The rabbis decide for you. That's already a halachic problem, but that's why it's called Olev Yored. Now, the question is going to be, how come the sins in chapter 4 require, no matter what your financial status is, you have to bring an animal, which is way more expensive, and how come these cases don't require the same animal if you don't have as much money? There's lots of reasons given. It could be these are more common, and the Torah just simply, if people wouldn't bring a korban, if they knew how much it costs, they wouldn't admit their sin. So if you make it too expensive, it's better to give a financial break so that they'll admit their liability. It could be that, or it could be, is the sin more common, or is the sin less severe? Understand the difference? You'll see Parshim going in both directions. Now, I want to make another point. There's a difference between doing something wrong, something terribly wrong, but you didn't realize you were doing it, as opposed to doing something which isn't so terrible. Now, or that one thing, or doing something we didn't do anything. For example, let's say someone said, I want you to give witness for me. I want you to come in and come to court and support me in court, or give your witness, and you say, and you refrain. So you did something wrong, but you didn't do anything. Of course, maybe you took a shvuah that you didn't know, whatever it's called, shvuah they do. There's a whole masechet about it. It gets really complicated. But it's not, you didn't do something wrong. Had you known, it was something you just didn't do anything, or you didn't admit doing something, but it's not an action. Okay. And the other things are going to be when you make up, let's say you decide, I'm not eating chocolate. You make a shvuah, I'm not going to eat chocolate. Make a promise called shvuat bituy. Or you make a promise, I will do something. I'm going to go to a minyan every day, and then you don't. If you make a promise to do something or not do something, and then you break that promise, so that's when you bring this korban Olev Yored. So it might be less severe because it's not a biblical prohibition. You're not chayv karet if you don't do it because you made up what was wrong, or you're doing less. And the other case, which we'll read all these cases in a minute, if you're tamei, which happens very easily, to become tamei, you're in contact with a dead body, a dead animal, whatever it is, you're tamei, and you forgot about it, didn't realize it, and you came to the temple. It's like going to work, when you're contagious. Remember the problem was I didn't know I was contagious, whatever it was, but you don't want to spread the disease. But you can't go to the mikdash when you're tamei. Now, a person going to the temple, he's not a bad person. It's not something wrong. You should come to the temple, but you didn't clean. You weren't like going to shul is good, right? But going to shul when you're contagious is bad. Got my point? So it's not as severe. It's bad, but it's not as bad as doing something wrong, which is actually doing something wrong. It's just, you're in the framework of doing something good, going to the mikdash, you forgot you were tamei. But again, it was unintentional. So those are all the cases. We'll see them now. These are the cases that you bring the special korban. So let's take a look at them. That's chapter 5. And look at the wording, what's similar. And there'll be something really interesting in chapter 5. Okay. So v'nefesh ki techda, doesn't say bishgaga. Notice? Because we'll see some of these things might be borderline intentional. Okay. V'nefesh ki techda. He knew something. He knew something, and he was a witness to something, and he didn't say. Okay. Understand? So again, he didn't do anything, but he knew that he knew. You know what I'm saying? He knew that he could give witness, and he did something, and he refrained from doing it. So Chazal understand that he swore that, that he doesn't know, because he's got to do something. But the main thing is, it's not shkaga. It's not something. He knows something, and he's doing something wrong. But it's not information. He's not saying that he knows. Yeah. Or if someone touches something tamei, if he becomes tamei, becomes spiritually unclean, or the carcass of a dead animal, something like that, whatever it is, that's one day tuma, which we don't know about yet. We'll learn about that in chapter 11. And it's not it's nothing wrong if he becomes tamei. The assumption is, all the Parshim explain, he becomes tamei and enters the temple, and he's not supposed to enter the temple if he's tamei. Or if he touches tumat adam, that'll be also in chapters 12 and 13 in Vayikra. What makes you tamei? And again, someone tamei, and he forgot about it, and he came to the temple. That's also going to be this another case. And the final case, when you promise to do something, which might say to do something good or do something bad, and not to do something, or yes to do something. Okay, whatever a person might say under oath, right? And then he forgot he made the oath, and then he realized he made the mistake. I promised not to eat chocolate, something like that, or to do something, he doesn't do it. And then again, these are all the cases. And then if he's guilty for any of these things, right? And here for the first time we have the word vidui. Vitvada asher chata aleha. Now, the rabbis understand, because of the pasuk by Yom Kippur, that here it doesn't say smicha, but it does say vidui. You understand the difference? Vidui means like you admit what you did. In chapter 4, it just says you put your hand on the korban, like you're associating yourself with that animal. There, the word smicha doesn't say vidui. Here it says vidui. And Ramban explains very nicely that here I need vidui because it's not really shogeg. I have to admit I did something wrong. So you have to admit it. That's why smicha is not enough. You have to do it. Even the rabbis, tied them all together. You can look at the Ramban on it later on. It's a very beautiful Ramban on that. If time, maybe we'll take a look at it. So he brings his korban to God. What he does, the same animal that we bring in chapter 4, and a kiva, a female animal, either from the sheep or from the goats, just like a regular chatat, and he gets kapara. But here's the case of Olev Yord. If he can't afford to bring a lamb or a goat, then he can bring instead 2 torim, 2 pigeons, I think. A tor is a pigeon. No, shnei b'nei una. What's it say in English here? A turtle doves, okay? A turtle dove is a tor, and or a pigeon. Okay? Now, one for chatat and one for olah, which is really strange. And he brings him to the kohen, and first the chatat, and then what's called des malika. It's a special type of shchita. We don't use a knife. Use your fingernail to cut off his head, and he sprinkles the blood on the mizbeach, and the rest he puts on the yesod. It's a chatat, and the second one he makes an olah. Now, I'll take a stop here for a minute. This law is very strange. I understand a chatat off, but why an olah? Anyone ever hear that question before? I hope you understand my question. I understand a chatat off instead of kivsma, but why am I bringing 2 birds? Just bring 1 bird for a chatat. Why is a chatat and an olah? Hope everyone understands the question. All the other chatot, you bring a chatat and that's it. Here, because you're bringing a chatat off, why need to bring a chatat olah? Is the question clear? You talk when you say chatat olev yored. Most of us are lower middle class has to know this, because that might be the korban you bring if you can't afford the expensive one. Okay, so I'll share with you the Ramban, a beautiful one. He says on every korban, the mizbeach gets 2 things. It gets the blood and it gets the emorim, the fat on the mizbeach. Now, when you bring a chatata off, the blood you sprinkle on the altar. You squeeze the blood and you sprinkle on the altar. But there's no imurim. The chicken doesn't have an abdominal cavity fat. So the mizbeach doesn't get any meat. Now, who eats the meat of the chatat? The kohen gets the meat. Gets the leftover bird. After you take off all the pieces, the bird goes to the kohen gets to eat it. But the mizbeach doesn't get anything. So Ibn Ezra beautifully explains that why do I need an olah? A chatat olah, after you sprinkle the blood, the chicken, the pigeon goes on the altar, the whole thing. pretty much after you take off the I forgot what do you call the I forget what we call it in English. The thing underneath underneath his chin.
Trachea,
Yeah. What's it called in English? The carbonate,
trachea or esophagus, both of them.
No,
The crop.
gizzard, something like that. And we'll read about it inside in a minute. But
Yeah.
what Ebenezer is beautifully is it's not he needs an olah. The mizbeach needs some meat because it's not fair. So therefore, I bring another pigeon, and that's an olah, so the mizbeach gets meat as well. And the coin notes, and each time the coin has to get something to eat, the mizbeach gets something to eat. And now I need the chatat olah. I need the off, a chatat off, together with an olah off, so the mizbeach gets something to eat. If you understood, fine. If not, nothing so terrible. Now, then if you're really, really poor, what happens? You can bring flour, but just regular flour. It's called a, let's take a look at it. We'll share this one. Where are we? Here we are. If you're really poor, if you can't even afford the two pigeons or the two turtle doves, he brings his korban asher asri teifa solet lechatat. Okay, he gets solet for a chatat, a tenth of an ephah. No what? No oil on top of it, no levona, just a simple chatat. Now, what does the altar get? Beviat coin. What does the coin do? The coin does kmitza, like a regular korban bitcha, and therefore the altar gets the kmitza, the handful of the coin puts on it. The rest of the mincha, the coin eats, and then we have and we solved our problem of both the mizbeach and the altar and the coin getting something. So he takes the komets on the mizbeach, and it's a chatat, okay? And v'chiper lav hakohen al chatato asher chata mechat me'eleh, v'yislach lo, is forgiven. V'aytal hakohen kamincha, just like a regular mincha in chapter 2, that the coin gets to eat, the noteret min mincha. So this mincha also the coin gets to eat. Okay, so that's the that's called olev yored, and it's all one dibor. It's all a chatat. Now it gets really complicated. We get what's called an asham. Now there's 3 cases of asham, each one very different. But what do they all share in common? It's a new dibor now. In dibor, there's 2 dibors, 2 ashams in this dibor, and 1 more dibor with the final asham called asham gzelot. This asham is different because the animal now, instead of being a 1-year-old lamb or a goat, now it's an ayo. An ayo is like a 2-year-old, an older. When a lamb grows up, a keves grows up, it becomes an ayo. So when you bring an ayo, it seems like this might be something maybe more harsh because it's a little bit more expensive. So the first case is when you misappropriate something from hektish. In other words, there's something that belongs to the temple treasury. So if a person commits some trespassing, he sins, again, unintentionally, but from something that belongs to the temple, Mikotche Hashem, basically he uses something that belonged to the temple, he uses it unintentionally. Then he realizes, oh my gosh, this didn't belong to me, this belonged to the temple, it was hektish. Therefore, he has to bring an ayo. It's severe because it relates to respect for the temple. So he brings an ayo, he brings a ram, benson, and its value of what do you call it? Of 2 shekel to the kodesh for his guilt. Okay. And then, but he has to return what he took, whatever value he took from the hektish, he has to pay back and add a 20% tax or 25% tax, depending on how you understand chomesh. Okay? And the coin does kapara v'nislachlo. Again, kapara v'nislachlo, all of them have those 2 words. Now, the next case, that's called asham mi'ilot. And this is more severe because you're dealing with misappropriating temple treasury items. Some belong to the temple and you took it for your use, and you had you gained something from it, so you have to pay back what you gained and add a fine. Now, the next case is really strange. It's called asham talui. Goes as follows: if it was a case that you would have to bring a chatat, if you did something bishkaga, if you know for sure that you did something wrong, but you didn't, when you did it, you didn't realize it. But then you realize what you did wrong, you bring a chatat. Here's a case when I did something, but I'm not sure if I'm chayav a chatat. In other words, I'm not sure. I might have eaten chaylev, but I don't know whether it was chaylev or not. I wasn't sure if it was kosher. I wasn't sure if it wasn't kosher. So it's called asham talui. And the problem here is you weren't aware what you did. You did something wrong, but you weren't aware of what you were doing. So just like those first cases in chapter 4, so what's really strange is if later on you find out that you did something wrong, right now you bring this korban because you're not sure if you did something wrong. If you actually find out, you still have to bring a chatat. But here you're bringing a korban for not knowing if you did something wrong and not being sure. So that's the strange case of Asham Talui. But really belongs with the cases of chapter 4. It's the same cases, but the shogeg, it's less shogeg, but you're I mean, it's both shogeg, it's unintentional, but afterwards you're not even sure if you really did something wrong or not. So in the meantime, while you're waiting, it's called what's called talui, means hanging. You're in sort of in limbo, therefore you bring in Asham Talui until you know for sure. Now, the last case is the most interesting. Because this sounds like something intentional. Now, this time it's not shogeg anymore. The word shogeg is not here. He does something wrong, but he's doing something against his fellow man. The first two cases was something against God. Now, these were beinam lamakom, using hektish or doing a lo tased that you're chayiv karet on, and being unaware. This is doing something wrong that has to do with your fellow man. And what did you do? Someone gave you you were holding a pikadon, like a collateral for something, and you claim, no, you never gave me something, but even though you really do have it. Or you sort of took tzumet yad, people understand is let's say you're in a business partnership. Let's say you invested in something and you have a fund that belongs to 2 or 3 people, and you use those funds for your own investment without asking permission from the other 2 people. I think there's a fancy word. What's that called in English? When you, I guess, embezzlement?
Escrow.
No, you're taking, it's money that's sort of yours, but really not yours because it belongs to somebody else. Gezel is when, as opposed to Gneva. Gneva is stealing something, like in hiding. Gezel is when you take something from somebody else, but you think it's okay. Or ashak damito oshek is like not paying a person on time. Again, what's common to all these? These are sins between man and his fellow man, but he's aware of what he's doing. But I want to claim as follows. Here, the best case is the last one. Obat Savida, he found a lost item, and he said, he didn't return it. He didn't admit it, right? And he swore that, no, he didn't take it. Or the question, there's a big question of Ishmael Shaker is referring just to the Avedah part, or that's another case, like swearing falsely. That's a machloket among the commentators.
Misappropriation.
Yeah, but either way, like not returning a lost item, no, and keeping it for yourself. What I want to claim here the person doing something wrong, but when he does it, he doesn't think it's wrong. There's something we're all way too familiar with. In other words, shogeg is when, had I been aware of what I'm doing, I wouldn't have done it. When I find out, I'm chayev. Here, these are cases where I don't think I did anything wrong. No, it's okay. I think that belonged to me. It's like, I'll give a bad example, which I hope it's okay, the example I'm giving. I'm paying school tuition because I send my child to a private school. The government doesn't give me anything. It doesn't give me enough. I could have gone to public school. The government would have paid everything. So I'm paying taxes as though I'm going to public school, but I'm not getting public school education, and therefore I'm paying too many taxes. So therefore, it's okay to cheat on your taxes. Don't quote me. I'm saying, but I'm giving an example how people think sometimes. It's okay to steal a little bit, or not, like half stealing, because I think it's okay. And then later, then I heard a share and I realized it was wrong. Got my point? Sometimes you take things that I think it belongs to me. Someone owes me something. So, I think I was cheating in business, something like that. So I'm taking something from somebody else, but I think it's okay.
It's
What I'm getting at-
rationalized. You're
Yeah,
rationalized.
that's a good word. I'm rationalizing what I think I'm doing is right. And when I did it, I was aware of what I was doing, but I didn't think it was wrong. And then afterwards, I heard a share, or I had guilt. And then, oh my gosh, what I did was wrong. Now, the word I'm using, why am I using the word Hashem? There's a story in Chumash about this called Yosef and his brothers. When the brothers sold Yosef, they were doing it l'shem shamayim. They were sure they were doing the right thing. Throwing him in the pit. He speaks lashon hara. He votes left wing. He's this terrible person who's who deserves everything we did to him. he deserves a punishment. He's told lashon hara about us. Like when they did it, they thought it was fine. 20 years later, where they realize, oh my gosh, what we did was really wrong. People do things, terrible things sometimes, and they think it's okay. Later on, they have remorse, and they're sorry they did it. And what did the brother say? Avo Hashemim anachnu, remember? Because we heard him crying and we didn't have Rahmanas on him. I think that's the best case of Hasham. So that's very different than Shogeg. I hope you get my point. A Shogeg is, Shogeg is, had I been aware, I wouldn't have done it. Here, you're aware of what you're doing. Your remorse comes later, and you realize what I did, I thought it was okay, and I realized now what I did was wrong. Right? That now you have to bring a more expensive korban, but the first thing you have to do is return what you took. And therefore, you pay back and add the 20%. Hope that's clear. So I think that's why that's what makes these all a special case. It's not about mamish gneva. Gneva, that's something else. You can't bring a korban for gneva. This is, I guess, rationalized stealing. And if it wasn't so common, you would think it's strange. But it's what people do all the time. And it's part of the process of doing shuvah. So you pay back what you took and you add your 20%, but you still have to bring a korban because when you do something against your fellow man, it's also a sin against God. It could be because you swore that you didn't find it. That's a machloket. You only bring the korban when you swore that you didn't do these things. Again, I don't want to get too detailed in the Parshanim. I just want to make that main distinction that there's a big difference between chapter 4, where you're doing something, but had you been aware of what you're doing, you wouldn't have done it. Here, you're aware of what you're doing, you just thought it was okay.
What about the case that is in Chumash about the fellow who found something and didn't give it back? Maybe he thought that the owner had made hefker already.
Yeah, finders keepers. That's it. And everybody's, I found a wallet. I took the money. Then, oh my gosh, I could have figured out who it belonged to, or I took it. When that happens all the time. You find something first, you keep it, then you realize I should try to return and find the person who owns it, or you find out later who owns it, and you give it back. But remember the cases in Chumash where it's the classic Hashavat Avidah are really interesting, because if you see something, an animal wandering, you know who the owner is because it says it's oyivcha, someone you hate. But I do nothing. I let it wander. Remember? But Torah says no. You have to take it and bring it back to him. Or I don't know what it belongs to, but I won't have to deal with that animal to feed it, take care of it, etc. So I just let it wander. So those are all things that it's called a Shabbat Avidah. Why is the Asham rationalized step called that's beauty. Okay, very good. Raki's question is very good. The introduction, that's the beauty of the Asham. I'll go back and share the screen again and show a question. Look at the introduction of all these cases in chapter 5, in the second half of Asham, in the second half of chapter 5. Okay? Nefesh ki techta malaba b'Hashem b'chesh b'midah. That's the beauty that, just like, remember, what's the first case of Milah? When you use something that belongs to Hekdesh. There's funds that belong to the temple, and you misappropriate them and use them for yourself. Right? So that for sure is a transgression against God. Here, you're doing something to your fellow man, but you're doing something against God. Now, some people say that's because he swore falsely that he didn't take it or he didn't do it. It could be. Or it could be that the very fact you think it's okay, and the fact that you're doing something against your fellow man, that's also a transgression against God. Because otherwise, why bring a korban? Just give him return his money, and give him his 20% fine, and that's it. Why do you need a korban? Because the fact that you rationalize it in the beginning is a sin against God as well. But the header Umala B'Av Hashem, this one, and the B'Nefesh Ki Tumamal, this one, and that was the first. No, and the first one was also no, that was the first one. That's Hashem B'Lot B'Yimah B'Chata B'Shkaga, and then this one also. Okay. The middle one doesn't say that. The middle one, B'Nefesh Techta B'Samiko, that's Hashem totally doesn't say Umala B'Av Hashem. That's just going back at Hashem totally, but the misappropriating Hekdesh, and then what's called Geza or Hashavat Abidah, etc. That's Mala B'Av Hashem. But that header, Very good, you pointed that out. Okay, so that's the unit. Let me just review it now and go back to my where's my toy? Where's my thing? Here we go. So I just organized them this way. We had shogeg unintentional that requires smicha. The olav already requires vidui. Probably the vidui because it's more intentional. And then depending on your income, what you bring either a sheep, or an animal, or a bird, or two birds and flour. And then the shogeg korban chapter 4 depends if you're the high priest, the Sanhedrin, a prince, or a regular person. And then the asham part, it's a ram, an ayo, and it's eaten by the priest as usual as before. And using hektish, if you're not sure you need a chatat, or I call borderline theft, if you add the payment and the fine, this also is payment and fine from hektish, and then you return it. So we got through the boring part of Sefer Vayikra. Okay, let me one more thing on my source sheet, and then we'll finish up, and I'll take questions. What else do I have here? Oh, here. I think I have it summarized. Where are we? Okay. No, on each one, the blood sprinkling is like the olad, and the fat is on like the shlamim. Chapter 4 emphasizes smicha, add an extra mem there, and chapter 5 has vidui. Chazal add them together, and the things in chapters in the asham, we're emphasizing you return what you took, either from hektish or from the other person. Okay, and then we discussed what the meaning of asham might mean. It's a type of guilt. It's like a more heavier type of guilt. Shogeg, I said, you're not aware of what he was doing. Had I been aware, I wouldn't have done it. Asham, I wasn't aware that I was doing was wrong. After I realized what I did was wrong, and then you pay it back. Now, I just reviewed here again. We talked about Olan Shlamim and Har Sinai, just in case you forgot. When Moshe writes down the words of God, of the covenant, he builds a Mizbeach at the bottom of the mountain, 12 matzevot for the 12 tribes, and they bring Olot and Shlamim, and then Moshe sprinkles the blood of the parim on the Mizbeach. He reads the Sefer Brit out loud, and the people answer Nasev v'Nishma. Moshe takes the blood and sprinkles it on the people, after sprinkling the other half on the Mizbeach. And that was my anchor to say that whenever we have Olan Shlamim, it's reminding us of Har Sinai. And as an employee, if I want to remember my connection to my boss and my job as a member of the Jewish people working for God, representing God, on my regular visit, a voluntary korban, I bring an Olah Shlamim to remember this event. If I want to amend my relationship, if I did a bad job as an employee, I acted in a way that makes God look bad. I did a bad job as an employee. I'm not going to get fired, but I want to do amends for what I did wrong. I want to sort of clean my slate. I'll get the idea of cleansing. And therefore, I need to bring a korban chatat. But as I describe the chatat, I have imagery of the Olan Shlamim as I present the chatat, with the blood is sprinkled on the Mizbach Olah, and the imurim, the fat of the korban, it's like the korban shlamim, also on top of the mizbeach. Okay, so we talk about why we visit the temple and how it reminds us. Now, as far as the chatat goes, one last topic. I mentioned before, sometimes, let me go to the end of the source sheet. I have a nice source for that. When you check a chatat, when you check a word, the first time you have chatat, so on chapter 29, back in Shmot, it's the first time we have a chatat. We'll talk about it soon. But why are we bringing chatat on the 7 days of Miluim if it's before Chet HaEgel? Because in Chumash, the 7 days of Miluim is after Har Sinai, but before the story of Chet HaEgel. Chazal changed the order around. So Rashi, who says this happened actually after Chet HaEgel, why does Aaron have to bring a chatat during the 7 days of Miluim? L'chaper al Maseh Egel shu apar. It says, why is the Kohen always bringing a par? Because Aaron made the Egel, which was a baby par, a baby cow. Therefore, the Kohen, when he brings the chatat, is always a par. That's Rashi Shita. The Bechor Shor says no. Why parachad ben bakar? Parachatat kidei sheyaviu nikiim v'zaken lifnei Hashem. It's nothing to do with the fact that you sinned. It's a way of cleansing yourself in front of God. So if chitui means cleansing, then it's not a question because I did something wrong. I'm just getting myself ready to get closer to God. Okay? And now for an olah, and then talks about the shlamim. This is what he called shu derech shalom v'kru v'dat. In other words, he's saying that during the 7 days of Miluim, when we're making the kohanim, during the minta kohanim, I need to do something to show my connection to Dat. And these are like prototypes of later what's going to be on the altar for later on. Okay, so now what I want to do now is just show you the first time we have a chatat in Chumash. If you remember, we have the story of Har Sinai. Moshe goes up for the first 40 days, and Chumash, after Moshe goes up for the first 40 days, talks about the laws of the Mishkan before the sin of the book called Menachem. Remember, the rabbis change the order around and says it happened afterwards, but Chumash records it beforehand. And the first time I find anyone bringing in chatat is after we have all the laws of the Mishkan. There's going to be a 7-day inaugural ceremony that turns the Kohanim into Kohanim. So listen to the korban that we bring, and this is a different type of chatat which I want to talk about. It says, B'zeh hadavar, we're in chapter 29 in Sefer Shmot, but we're going to have to do this next week because this is the background to understand chapters 8 and 9 in Vayikra. I mean, chapters 7 and 8 chapters 8 and 9 in Vayikra, which is when this is actually done. Again, we'll do this next week. I just want to talk about the chatat, just hear how the chatat is presented. This is what we need to do to sanctify them in order to officiate in the temple. Take a parachad ben bakar, elim shnaim, etc., and some, these are all the different things that will be korbanot later on, some bread and some flour and some wafers, etc. You put them in a basket, and you bring Aaron and his sons, and we wash them in water. These are all the things we're going to do later in the mikdash. And you put the special clothing on him. He puts his big day kuna on, and you bring his sons do the same thing. You put all the clothing, etc. Then here we go. The first animal, v'shachata et apar difnei Hashem, petach ha'omed, you check the par in front of the tent of meeting. V'lechachta b'dam apar v'natav karnot mizbeach v'etzvach, you put the blood on the corners of the mizbeach. V'kol adam yitzpoch yisod ha'mizbeach. Then you take the chelev you put on top of the altar, like before. And then the meat of the basar, of the par, okay, you burn it, because no one can eat it yet, because there's no kohanim yet. So even though it's a chatat chitzonah, it's burnt, because there's no kohanim to eat it. And this is a chatat. Now, chatatu because he did something wrong, or because you're just cleansing the mizbeach. Now, what's the proof that you're cleansing the mizbeach? So we have the chatat, and we have the olah l'reach nichoach. And then it says at the end, this 7-day inaugural ceremony, you to Aaron and his sons every day. Now listen carefully. You do a parchatat, each of these days. So most Parshim understand the kippurim are the 2 elim that he brings, the parchatat in addition to the 2 elim. But the blood of the chatat you put on the mizbeach, why does the mizbeach need kapara? Why do we need to put blood on the mizbeach? So the fact that during these 7 days of miluim, I'm putting blood on the mizbeach, just like I'm putting blood on the kohanim. The mizbeach did nothing wrong. The mizbeach didn't sin, but it's part of cleansing. It's part of like dedicating it for a job to do. So it could be if chitui means like to cleanse. That was the title I had today. Is a chatat necessarily because you did something wrong? Or is a chatat a type of cleansing ceremony to get you prepared for reestablishing a relationship with God or beginning a relationship with God? Now, we're going to see later on, we'll do this when we get to the Yoledet and the Mitzorah, etc., that when you're tamei and you come back and you can't go to the temple and you have to come back, you bring what's called korban machshirin. We do this on Yom Kippur as well. It's called a chatat olah, which the rabbis call korban machshirin. It's a korban that prepares you for your encounter with God. So a chatat by itself seems to be coming because you've done something wrong. That's the case we saw today. But when a chatat comes together with an olah, can the chatat, is there a possibility that chatat can be brought when you did nothing wrong at all? Now, why am I giving this background? A yoledet, a mother gives birth to a baby, she has to bring a chatat and olah. What'd she do wrong? So what the rabbis say, she swore, but she wouldn't do it again. They have to find a reason. But we have to entertain the possibility that chatat might mean cleansing, and simply part of your preparation to encounter God after you've gone through some event in life that you weren't able to go be close to God, and you're returning. I need some inaugural ceremony to re-inaugurate my connection to God, and that we're going to use that to explain Yom Kippur as well. We need the Yom Kippur korbanot on the 8th day after the 7 days of Miluim to try to understand why do we need this yearly cleansing of the temple. Is it because we did something wrong, or because we're about to do something right? Is it a inaugural ceremony, like what I think call it investiture, when you give someone a new job? So what's the purpose of this whole ceremony? Is a chatat only because you did something wrong? Or is there a possibility of a chatat even if you did nothing wrong? It's just a type of cleansing and preparation to get you ready to encounter God. Now, and it very much depends if, once you hold like Rashi and Chazal, that the 7 days of Miluim happen after Chet Egel, and the reason for the par during the 7 days of Miluim is because of Chet Egel, then it seems like every chatat is because of some type of a sin. On the other hand, Chumash presents them before Chet Egel, and it could be these laws were given before Chet Egel. So it could be that a chatat might be a korban that we need no matter what. Now, to solve the problem or to discuss the problem, when we study Sefer Devarim, there's no chatat. There's Ola and Shlamim in Sefer Devarim, but there's no chatat. And the laws in Devarim reflect the situation before Chet Egel. So we'll probably end up going more in that direction. That a chatat and Ola relate to God's attributes of mercy, but we'll see how much it's really necessary to do something wrong to require a chatat. But it's a chatat all that together. It sounds really complicated, but we need a whole shir to show it. And so what we need to do next, we have to go through the 7 days of Miluim, see how it's fulfilled in Sefer Vayikra, in chapters 8, and then see how the Yom HaShmini korbanot, when the Shekhinah returns in Yom HaShmini, what korbanot we need at Yom HaShmini, how they're similar to the ones in Yom Kippur, and how they come to explain what we do for Yoledet and a Mitzorah, etc. In the Prakim that preceded Yom Kippur. We have to put the book in order and see why it's out of order. And I hope I confused you. But I'm just trying to set the stage where I want to get through. I just want to get the idea that chatat for sure is a type of cleansing. It relates to doing something wrong. For sure, you need cleansing after you did something wrong. The question, you need cleansing if you did nothing wrong. So that we have to discuss. But I just want to get, just to understand those two chapters 4 and 5 of Vayikra, are really difficult. I try to go through them a little bit to understand what they're about. And again, the main thing is you're an employee, and when you do something wrong as an employee, you have to recognize what you did wrong, admit what you did wrong, and learn from your mistake. And I need some action to show that'll focus on my thoughts. Any quick questions? Oh, let's chat a couple of things in the chat. Source sheets, I'll tell.
Is there a pasuk that says the Chiteta Talaviyim during their inauguration?
Yeah, there's lots of them. The Chitui, there's what do you call it? Chatati with Paraduma. You have Mei Chatat. That's not because no one sinned, it's just sprinkling water that cleanses something. The Vaychatel Mizbech Vitchatu Leviim. Levim need Chitui. The word in Hebrew for what are you talking when you have to clean a room, like a operating room, when you have to disinfect the room, it's called chitui nowadays. But there's lots of examples of the word chatat. If you look in here, I'll show you a tool to use. You can do this on your own. You open up your web, you go to a place called alatorah.com. Where's Alatorah? Here's everywhere. Alatorah here. V'nefesh here. Let's go to chatat. Let's go to chapter 4. There. And pick the word. It's chatato here. It's chatat. Okay, you take chatat, you click on it. You have a concordancia, how many times the word's there. Then you have the milon, the BDB one, and you have the regular milonim. So here. Chat in Machberet Menachem. There's Machberet Menachem. You have Sefer Shem Rabbi Ibn Janach, and you have Sefer Shem of Radak. So here, they have all the examples here. Here. Echad, Tachteni Beizov. One is the cleansing. Techateni Beizov Ataher and Teilim. V'chite et habayit and Vayikra to cleanse the house with the Mitzorah. Vayitchatu al-Levim, cleansing the Levim. Inyan Torahim. That's cleansing. Okay, that's the title of the shir, cleansing. Vashini, Kein Adam Asher Lo Yechta. Sometimes for sure it means sinning. V'chatati negdi tamid. Kavot agla chata'a. Okay, from Yeshayahu. Avihu b'ni Shlomo chataim. B'bat Shevet el Shlomo. If they make Adoniyahu king. And then here, Ebizhach is a little more complicated. Chatai here. This is Chatai Yisrael, Chatu Mashka. That's mom is sinning. And in Acher, V'chite et habayit, V'chitov yom hashvi'i, V'chite et hamizbeach. That was the example we brought. Hakohen machate ota. cleansing from tumat met. But the two meanings of atonement for something wrong or forgiveness for something wrong, and cleansing. So all the Milonim have it. Sefer Shosrim has it.
I didn't understand your explanation of why, if you're not paying your taxes appropriately, why it's not gazela, that you don't have to bring a
No, it is gazela. It's
Right.
gazela, but when you did it, you thought it was okay.
Right.
So when you realize it wasn't right. Don't take my example wrong, but I said it was wrong. But I'm giving example, but sometimes people think it's called you rationalize something, and you take something that's not yours. There's a big question when you owe taxes and don't pay them. Is that considered, is that the same thing as taking money from there's difference, it's sort of passive type of kneva. Ask Rabbi J, he's the expert on these things. What's considered thing. It's really complicated stuff that most people don't want to learn. But it's complicated, when you because everyone's material, there's some little things, your babysitter's not going to pay taxes on the money you pay your babysitter. You give a tip to somebody, even by law, maybe they're obligated. I'm not sure exactly how the law goes on income tax, but in general, what I'm getting at is that my idea of Hashem was you did something wrong, but when you did it, you thought it was okay, and then you realize later on that what I did was wrong. And it's when you take something that you think belongs to you or you have the right to take. That happens in business a lot, or in in arguments between shchenim. Or do you think someone owes you something, so you take something of theirs until you get your thing back? It's called like mitfo something.
Rabbi, a reminder, you said you were going to distinguish atonement and repentance at the beginning.
Oh yeah, I said I don't know what atonement means, but I know repentance at Yom Kippurim is Kippurim. Kippurim is protection from the Shekhinah. That was what to encounter Shekhinah. You need chatat for a Kippurim, but if put it this way, if Kippurim requires a chatat, we'll see later on. We'll get to it when we get to the Yom Kippur Korbanot and the chatat olad duo for Yom HaShmini. But if Kippurim means protection from Shekhinah, so what enables me to encounter Shekhinah? Because we're human, we're not able to encounter the Shekhinah. Remember? But we do encounter the Shekhinah. So the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur needs kapara, he needs protection from the Shekhinah. Now, is that only because he did something wrong? Or the fact that we're human, you need kapara? So is it a cleansing that enables you to encounter, even if you did nothing wrong? Is there a need for cleansing even if you did nothing wrong? That's my question. So kapara, what I claim is kapara is going to be protection from Shekhinah, and you need chatat as preparation for kapara. It's called chatat kippurim. The chatat would be called a type of kippurim. So is the chatat cleansing a sin, or just cleansing, preparing? I compared it to polishing your silver. It's not dirty, but you want to make it shine a little bit to prepare you to show it off. When I'm talking about
the true soul,
to find distinction, now it turns out there's always something. Everyone always did something wrong, but that's a big question. Is there value in a chatat? Now, what I'm going to get to, jumping way ahead, before midat rachamim, when everything is you sin, you're punished, and that's it. When you have midat hadin, so that's it. It's a done deal. The second we're in the framework of rachamim, where God can forgive, and we're not sure if we're doing something wrong, and God doesn't punish right away. When you're not in this, Pavlov's dog system, not Pavlov's dog.
Yeah.
I think that's what it's called. You do something good, rewarded bad, you're punished. The second you don't get punished right away, you don't get rewarded right away, and God can't forgive you, there's a lack of clarity. So it could be that entire situation of once we move to a framework with our boss of midat rachamim, I need kapara no matter what. I need cleansing even if I did nothing wrong. But on the other hand, ein adam bar sholechta. There's always someone. The assumption is you've always done something wrong, or you might have done something wrong. So that's the question: how much is chatat a cleansing, or how much it's getting rid of something that was dirty, that was cleansing guilt kind of idea. I mean, so again, I'm purposely not. I'm not defining because I'm not sure, but it definitely has both sides to it. Good. That's why I showed the definition. Certain times, for sure, it means cleansing. and nothing wrong. And certain times for sure it's a sin. There's no doubt about it. So after sin, you need cleansing. The question, do you need cleansing even if you didn't sin? That's the question. I've got it. But if you sin, for sure you need cleansing. Is there a possibility of the need of cleansing even if you didn't sin? It's just a fair fact that you're human or a muggle, whatever you want to call yourself. Okay, anyway, everybody have a good week. I have to stop here. And next week, Rabbi Jay will be back and we'll be on time.
Thank you.